Hey kids, um, starting to get a little bit dark, but let's see if we can knock one more out. Today I'm still in Homa, sitting in this hotel doing COVID testing and quarantine, waiting to go to work. And we're reading Redwall, one of my favorites when I was a kid. So where we finished up, Clooney, the evil warlord bilge rat, just came to the Redwall Abbey. Clooney's army halted at the sound of the Joseph bell. As the dust settled, Fangburn looked to his leader for approval. "They're ringing that big bell again, Chief. Ha ha! Maybe they'll think it'll frighten us off." The warlord's eyes rested balefully on his scout. "Shut your mouth, fool! If you'd have done as I'd ordered and come right back to report the way Cheese Thief did, we might have been inside that abbey by now." Fangburn slunk back into the ranks. He hoped Clooney had forgotten, but Clooney rarely forgot anything on a campaign. The element of surprise had been lost. Now he must try another ploy, the show of force. The mere sight of a fully armed horde had worked before, and he had little doubt it would prove effective now. Ordinary peaceful creatures were usually panic-stricken at the sight of Clooney the Scourge at the head of his army. The rat was a cunning general, except the times when his mad rage took control of him. But what need of berserk fits for a bunch of silly mice? Clooney knew the value of fear as a weapon, and Clooney was a fearsome figure. His long, ragged black cloak was made of bat's wings, fastened at the throat with a mole skull. The immense war helmet he wore had the plumes of a blackbird and the horns of a stag beetle adorning it. From beneath the slanted visor, his one eye glared viciously out at the abbey before him. Scary guy. Matthias's voice rang out sharp and clear from the high parapet. "Halt! Who goes there?" Redtooth swaggered forward and took up the challenge in his chief's name as he called back up at the walls. "Look well, all creatures! This is the mighty horde of Clooney the Scourge. My name is Redtooth. I speak for Clooney, our leader." Constance's reply was harsh and unafraid. "Then speak your piece and be gone, rats!" Silence hung upon the air while Redtooth and Clooney held a whispered conference. Redtooth returned to the walls. "Clooney the Scourge says he will not deal with badgers. He will only speak with the leaders of the mice. Let us in so that my chief may sit and talk with your chief." Redtooth dodged back as his request was greeted by howls of derision and some loose pieces of masonry from the ramparts. These plump little mice were not as peaceful as they first looked. The rats looked to Clooney, but he was eyeing the abbot who had joined Constance and Matthias. They appeared to be consulting quietly. Clooney watched tensely. There seemed to be some disagreement between the old mouse and his two advisors. While they conferred a while. Then Matthias came forward to the parapet. He pointed at Clooney and Redtooth with his staff. "You there, and you also. My abbot will talk with you both. The rest must remain outside." A rumble of protest from the horde was silenced by a crack from Clooney's tail. He lifted his visor. "We agree, Mouse. Let us in." "But what about hostages for safe conduct?" hissed Redtooth. Clooney spat contemptuously. "Don't talk fool's talk. Do you imagine a load of mice in funny robes could take me captive?" Redtooth gnawed anxiously on a split claw. "Maybe not, Chief, but have you cast a weather eye over that badger?" Clooney answered quietly out of the side of his mouth. Don't worry, I've been watching her. A real big country bumpkin. No, these are mice of honor. They'd sooner die than break their word to anyone. You leave this to me. As Clooney and Red Tooth made for the gatehouse door, Constance shouted, Put down your weapons, rats! Throw off your armor and show us that you come in peace. Red Tooth spluttered angrily. Hell's teeth! Who does that one think she's ordering around? Clooney shot him a warning glance. Quiet. Do as she says. Both rats took off their armor and placed it in a pile on the road. Matthias cried down to Clooney. If you really are Clooney the Scourge, then we know of your tail. It is a weapon. Therefore you will knot it tightly around your waist so that it cannot be used. Clooney laughed mirthlessly. He squinted at Matthias and cracked his tail dramatically. Young mouse, he called, you do right to ask this thing, for you truly are looking at Clooney the Scourge. Having said this, he took his tail in his claws and pulled the poisoned war spike from its tip. Tossing it on the armor pile, Clooney hitched his tail in a knot around his middle. Now, will you let us in, mice? You can see we are unarmed. Ponderously, the heavy gate inched open. The two rats passed through the bristling forest of staves. The gate slammed shut behind them. Clooney mentally estimated the walls to be of immense thickness, as he and Redtooth, ducking their heads, emerged from the tunnel-like arch into the Abbey grounds, where Constance and Matthias were waiting in the sunlight. The defenders followed the two rats closely, menacing them with staves. Matthias rapped out a curt command. Leave us, mice! Go back to your duties, on the wall! Unhappy at leaving the abbot unguarded, the mice hesitated to obey the order to withdraw. Clooney addressed Matthias scornfully. Here, mouse, watch me shift 'em! Suddenly he swirled upon the apprehensive creatures. The single eye rolled madly in its socket as Clooney bared claws and fangs, snarling, Ha ha! I've got a powerful hunger for mice! You'd best get off those walls! Ha ha! Clooney leapt into the air. The mice scattered in panic. Constance stopped the proceedings with a loud, angry bark. Here now, enough of that, rat! You are here to talk with the abbot. Now get along with you! Matthias was glad he was walking behind the rats. He blushed with shame. Clooney had sent the defenders scattering like butterflies in a whirlwind. Matthias was furious. The enemy now knew he was dealing with untrained and untested soldiers. As the party walked toward Cavern Hole, Clooney could sense hostility emanating from the young mouse who flip-flopped behind him in overlarge sandals. Strange for one so young to be counted as a captain, he thought. Moreover, the little fellow didn't seem to fear him. But enough of that. Clooney would deal with him when the time came. Meanwhile, the big rat gazed about his surroundings in secret admiration. What an astounding place! He allowed himself to peek at the future. One day, this would be called Clooney's Castle. He liked the sound of that. Secure from attack, living off the fat of the land. In his mind's eye he saw it all. Those mice and the woodland creatures enslaved, living just to serve him. He would hold sway as far as the eye could see. Power, an end to his rovings. A dream come true. King Clooney. Entering the abbey, the party stopped to make way for a pretty little field mouse bearing a tray. Oh, Matthias, she said, I've brought some refreshments for you and... Thank you, Cornflower. Put them down on the table, said Matthias abruptly. Redtooth nudged Clooney. Cornflower, eh? Satan's knows she's a pretty little one for you. Clooney remained silent. He stood insolently watching Cornflower set the table in Cavern Hole. A pretty one indeed. The abbot indicated chairs. They all sat, except Clooney, who lounged against the table, using the chair as a footstool. He glared at Redtooth until he stood and waited alongside his chief. Idly, Clooney picked up a bowl of honeyed milk and sampled it. Slop! He spat it out on the floor. The abbot folded his paws in the wide sleeves of his habit and stared impassively at the warlord. What do you want? He has a voice. What do you want at Redwall Abbey, my son? Clooney kicked the chair over and laughed madly. As the echoes died around the room, his face went grim. Your son? Ha! That's a good one. I'll tell you what I want, mouse. I want it all. The lot. Everything. Do you hear me? Matthias's chair clattered on its side as he sprang forward, breaking free from the restraining paws of the abbot. Listen, rat! You don't scare me! I'll give you our answer! You get nothing! Now do you understand that? Shaking with fury, Matthias allowed himself to be pulled back to his chair. The abbot turned to Clooney. You must forgive Matthias. He is young and headstrong. Now, as to your proposal, I am afraid it is out of the question. Should you or your army require medical attention, food, clothing, or help upon your way, you will find us only too willing to assist. Clooney interrupted rudely by pounding upon the table until the abbot was silenced. He pointed a claw at Redtooth. Read him the articles. Redtooth held up a tattered parchment. He cleared his throat. These are the articles of surrender, to be obeyed by all creatures who come under the law of Clooney the Scourge or any of his commanders. 1. Surrender will be total and unconditional. 2. Clooney will execute the leaders of all who choose to oppose him. 3. All property conquered will belong solely to Clooney the Scourge. This includes homes, food, crops, land, and additionally all creatures dwelling on said property. They shall be owned by Clooney. Thwack! Redtooth got no further. Unable to contain himself, Matthias sent his staff ripping through the middle of the articles. As the torn document fluttered to the floor, Redtooth launched himself at Matthias with a snarl. The rat was actually in mid-air when a huge, blunt paw knocked him flat. He lay stunned, with Constance standing over him. Why pick on a mouse? Surely a big, strong rat like you can deal with an old badger. Come on, try me for size. It was only the timely intervention of Abbot Mortimer that saved Redtooth's life. Constance, will you please let the rat up? Much as I would like to see him get his just deserts, you must remember, we cannot break the law of hospitality in our abbey. Redtooth staggered shakily to his feet, backing warily away from the badger. Clooney spoke as if nothing had occurred. You, Abbot Mouse, you have until tomorrow evening to give me your answer. Not normally given to anger, the abbot stared Clooney in the eye, his face a mask of cold fury. I do not need until tomorrow, rat. You can have my answer now. How dare you come here with your robber band and read articles of death and slavery to me? I'll tell you that neither you nor your army will ever set paw or claw inside Redwall, not while I or any of my creatures have breath in our bodies to fight and resist you. That is my solemn word. Clooney sneered and turned on his heel. Followed by Redtooth, he stamped out. On the stairs between Cavern Hole and the great hall, he stopped and turned, his cold voice echoing between both chambers. Then die, all of you, every male, female, and young one. You have refused my terms. Now you will suffer the punishment of Clooney. You will beg on your knees for death to come swiftly, but I shall make your torment long and loud before you die. It was then that Constance did something that creatures would speak of in years to come. Exerting the full strength of a female badger, she lifted the massive cavern hole dining table. It was a huge, solid, oaken thing that no dozen mice could even move. Dishes clattered and food spilled as Constance heaved the table over her head. Her voice rose a roar. Get out, rats! Leave this abbey! I'm weary of your voices! Hurry before I break the laws of hospitality and ask the abbot's forgiveness later! Go, while you still have your skulls! With the best grace he could muster, Clooney walked rather quickly up the stairs, followed by Redtooth, who laughed nervously. Ha! Big country bumpkin, eh, Chief? One more word from you back there and she'd have thrown that table and crushed us. Remembering who it was that he had spoken to in this insolent fashion, Redtooth cringed, expecting Clooney to deal him a blow for impudence. But nothing happened. Clooney was standing transfixed, oblivious to all about him, even Matthias and the abbot who had followed him out. Clooney stood staring at the tapestry. Who is that mouse? He gasped. Matthias followed the direction of the rat's gaze. He walked to the tapestry with his paw outstretched. Do you mean this mouse? Clooney nodded dumbly. Matthias, still with his paw outstretched, declared proudly, This is Martin the Warrior! He founded our order, and I'll tell you something else, rat. Martin was the bravest mouse that ever lived. If he were here today, he'd just take up his big sword and send you and all your bullies packing. Those of you he didn't chop up into crow meat. Much to everyone's surprise, Clooney allowed himself to be shown out. He was like one in a daze all the way back to the gatehouse. A hush fell over the mice on guard as Clooney and Redtooth were led out onto the road. Swiftly the horde gathered around the warlord and his lieutenant. They awaited orders. Deputizing for Clooney, Redtooth called out, Form up! Back to the church, everyone! Clooney marched automatically, shaking his head in disbelief. Martin the warrior, the mouse who pursued him through his nightmares. What did it mean? As Redtooth marched away, a voice hailed him from the wall. He turned and looked up. The torn articles, the parchment wrapped around a fistful of rotting vegetables, splattered in his face. Livid with rage, he clawed the foul mess from his eyes and saw Constance leaning over the parapet, with a wicked grin of delight on her striped muzzle. The badger shouted mockingly, Don't forget to call again, rat! I'd be delighted to see you. We've got some unfinished business that I'm looking forward to settling. Just you and me, Redtooth. Before the rat could reply, she had vanished from sight. We can get another chapter. Later that evening, Brother Alf was patrolling his stretch of wall when he noticed a movement in the ferns at the edge of Mossflower Wood. Constance and Matthias were summoned hastily. They peered over the parapet. Brother Alf pointed where he had seen the ferns moving. Over there, to the right of that aspen, look, they're moving again. Matthias had better nocturnal vision than either of his friends. He was the first to recognize the forlorn figure that rolled on the grass. It's Ambrose Spike. He's hurt. Quick, let's get down there. Hold fast, Constance warned. It may be a trap. Matthias was loth to hang about while a creature was lying injured within his sight, but he had to heed his friend's advice. There just might be some of Clooney's rats lying in ambush for any creature that ventured into the shadowy fringes of Mossflower. However, Matthias was growing impatient. We can't leave poor Ambrose lying out there, Constance. He'll die. We've got to do something. The badger sat down with her snout between her paws. Yes, we've got to think. Anyone got an idea? Two mice joined her. Hardly had Matthias sat down when he leapt up again. I've got it. Stay here. I'll be back in a tick. Brother Alf watched the little figure flip-flopping off. He gave a sigh and shook his head. What do you suppose Matthias is up to? The badger smiled affectionately. More and more she was coming to trust Matthias's natural skill as a leader and a tactician. Don't fret, Brother Alf, whatever it is. You can bet your habit it'll be a Matthias original gem. That young mouse has got more in his head than a pile of acorns. Brother Alf looked out at the still form in the grass. It may be too late. Ambrose isn't even twitching. Look, he's not rolled up in a ball anymore. Further speculation was curtailed by the appearance of Matthias. With him were half a dozen moles. Their leader glanced out at the hedgehog. He scratched some hasty calculations on the wall with his claw, then turned to Matthias. Oi, I think we can get yon hedge pig back, sir. You get us out in the gate and stand watch. Turning to his team, the four-mole, for that was his official title, began discussing tunnel width coupled with reverse prickle drag, forward traction, and all the other specialist details that are routine to the average qualified tunnel mole. Matthias whispered to Constance and Brother Alf, Four-mole and his crew. Our first crack at rescue work. They've often rescued burrowers from cave-ins. All we have to do is stand guard by the southeast wicket gate until they're safely back. Right, what are we waiting for? Let's go, said the badger. Silently they slid outside the small green-painted iron door, Matthias straining his eyes anxiously to see if there were any signs of life in the hedgehog. He still lay about 150 mouse paces from where they stood. The moles unraveled a rope sling. Four moles stood watching as two of his team started to dig. Matthias looked on in wonderment. 1 minute they were above ground, and a moment later there was a veritable shower of loam and topsoil as they vanished beneath the earth, nature's own technicians. In a trice they were back, moist snouts poking from the excavation. They made their ground report to Four-mole. Him be nice and soft, sir. Ain't no rock nor root stopping us'ns. Straight for we ma thinking. Satisfied, Four-mole moved toward the test hole with the rest of his team. I'll dig ahead. You moiden workins. Gaffer and Marge, follow up a-shoring. He tugged his snout respectfully to Matthias and Constant. You gentle beast, bide here till lesson back. Another quick shower of soft earth, and the moles were lost to view beneath the ground surface. Constance sniffed the breeze as Matthias turned his ears to the nighttime woodland sounds. They watched the ground humping into continuous hillocks that progressed farther as the moles tunneled toward Ambrose Spike. The night remained calm and still, but Matthias and Constance stayed alert, both knowing if they failed to observe this rudimentary law of nature, the penalty could be fatal. Matthias did a little shuffle of excitement. Look, they've come up right under poor old Ambrose. My word, what splendid moles! Good heavens, he's completely vanished! They must have him inside the tunnel. In a surprisingly short time, the tunnelers were back. Emerging from the hole, they had carried the hedgehog in a rope sling across their backs, refusing any help from the badger or the mouse. Four-mole merely tugged his snout. Nay, you uns only get your paws dirted. As swiftly as possible, Ambrose was hurried to the Abbey infirmary and sick bay. He was attended by the abbot himself. A hasty diagnosis revealed that the hedgehog was suffering from a long, jagged wound that ran from the back of his ear to the tip of his paw. Brother Alf nodded sympathetically. That's probably what caused old Ambrose to pass out, pain and loss of blood. He must have traveled a fair way in that condition. Do you think he'll live, Father Abbot? The abbot chuckled quietly. He cleaned the long, ugly wound and applied a poultice of herbs. No cause for alarm, Brother Alf. Ambrose Spike is made of leather and needles. Tough as a boulder, this old ruffian is. Look, he's beginning to come round already. Sure enough, after some peculiar grunts and much curling and uncurling, the hedgehog opened his eyes and looked about. Oh, my aching ear, Father Abbot! You wouldn't see a poor son of the Spike suffering like this without a drop of last October's nut-brown ale to wet his parched gullet, he pleaded. All the creatures laughed out loud with delight and relief at seeing their old friend alive and well once again. Matthias was astonished at the amount of nut-brown ale that Ambrose supped before he deemed himself fit enough to make a report. The hedgehog smacked his lips noisily. Ah, that's better. Now let me see. I did as you asked me. I gave as many creatures fair warning as I could. The Joseph Bell helped a great deal to warn everyone. Well, to cut a long story short, it must have been near noon when I stopped at Vole Bank. I told the voles the bad news, and blow me if that little ninny Colin Vole didn't go shrieking and screaming all over the place as to how they'd all be murdered in their beds. Believe me, there was no way of silencing that daft young thing. Anyhow, his noises must have alerted a pack of those rats who were out foraging. Before you could say knife, they were upon us. There was such a gang of them that I couldn't do anything. I had to curl up. They carried off young Colin and his mom and dad. But try as they would, there's no laying claws on Ambrose Spike. No, sir. If any one of them had a go at me with the point of an iron, or one of them had a go at me with the point of an old churchyard railing. Stabbed away at me, the devil did. They reckoned I was dead. Said I was too spiky to eat, so they dragged the Vole family off, and I lay still until the coast was clear. I made it as far as Mossflower, and that's all I can remember. Uh, is there any more left in that jug? Oh, this wound's giving me jip. I need ale. For medicinal purposes, Father Abbot. Matthias groaned and hung his head in despair. The Vole family taken captive, death or slavery was all the wretched creatures could look forward to. Emboldened by the rescue of the hedgehog, Matthias was about to suggest that he and Constance, together with some hand-picked helpers, venture to undertake a rescue mission to St. Ninian's Church. It was as if the abbot and Constance both read his thoughts. At the same time, Abbot Mortimer sighed and shook his head at Matthias. The badger was more voluble. Matthias, forget it. Abandon any hopes you have of snatching the Vole family from under Clooney's nose. Imagine it. If a few of us go up against several hundred armed rats in their own camp. Ridiculous! A fat lot of good we'd be as defenders of Redwall with our heads stuck to Clooney's standard. Matthias, you're a brave young mouse, so please try to set an example to the rest of us by not coming a foolish or dead one. On reflection, Matthias could see the wisdom of the badger's counsel. Long after they had all retired for the night, he sat up thinking. 100 mad ideas pounded through his brain, each one wilder than the last. Feeling at a loss, he wandered up to the great hall and stood in front of the tapestry. Without consciously realizing it, he found himself talking to Martin the warrior. Oh, Martin, what would you have done in my place? I know I'm only a young mouse, a novice, not even a proper Redwall member yet. But once you were young too, I know what you would have done. You would have buckled on your armor, picked up your mighty sword, and gone down to that church and battled with the rats until they released the voles or perished beneath your blade. But alas, those days are gone. I have no magic sword to aid me, only the advice of my elders and betters, which I must listen. Matthias sat down upon the cool stone floor. He gazed longingly up at Martin the warrior, so proud, so brave. What a dashing figure he cut, looking back down to himself in his baggy green robes and oversized sandals. Matthias felt hot tears of shame and frustration spilling from his eyes and dripping on his young whiskers. Unable to stop himself, he wept freely. The soft touch of a gentle paw on his back caused him to look around. It was Cornflower. Matthias wished he were dead. He quickly turned his face away, knowing she could see his tears. Cornflower, please go away, Matthias sobbed. The little field mouse, however, would not go. She sat down on the floor next to Matthias. Taking the edge of her pinafore, she softly wiped away his tears. For such a shy little mouse, she had quite a lot to say. Matthias, don't be ashamed. I know why you cry and grieve. It's because you are kind and good, and not a hard-hearted, pitiless rat like Clooney. Please listen to me. Even the strongest and bravest must sometimes weep. It shows they have a great heart, one that can feel compassion for others. You are brave, Matthias. Already you've done great things for one so young. I am only a simple country-bred field mouse, but even I can see the courage and leadership in you. A burning brand shows the way, and each day your flame grows brighter. There's none like you, Matthias. You have the sign of greatness upon you. One day Redwall and all the land will be indebted to you, Matthias. You are a true warrior. Matthias, with his eyes dry and his head held high, stood up. He felt himself stand taller than he ever had. He helped Cornflower to her feet and bowed to her. Cornflower, how can I ever thank you for what you have said? You, too, are a very special mouse. It is late now. Go and get some rest. I think I will stay here a while longer. The field mouse untied her headband. It was her favorite one, pale yellow, bordered with cornflowers, after which she was named. She tied it to Matthias's arm, the right one, just above the elbow, a maiden's colors for her champion warrior. Silently she crept off. Matthias could feel his heart beating against his chest. He spoke to the image of Martin. Thank you, warrior. You spoke to me through Cornflower. You gave me the sign I asked of you. Okay. Stuff is happening. And we'll read more later. It is proper dark now, and I need to think about going to sleep. Hope you guys have a good night. And I'll talk to you soon. We'll read more soon. Love you, kids. Bye.